Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to today's Enterprise Connect Virtual Summit on Microsoft Teams and Telephony, broadcast by Informa. This session is 5 steps to making your Microsoft Teams calling migration a success, sponsored by LoopUp. I'm Eric Kraft with Enterprise Connect, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This session is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about our speakers, download resources, share this webinar via social media outlets, and participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of our presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download a copy of the slides via the Resources widget. At the end of our session, we'll ask you to complete our survey found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. Lastly, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please click the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen or type your issue into the Q&A area, and we'll be glad to offer one-on-one assistance to you. So, on with the presentation. Our session, again, is 5 steps to making your Microsoft Teams calling migration a success. And our speakers are Jason Sloan, Senior Director at LoopUp, and Michael Boggia, Director, U.S. Sales at LoopUp. Jason, Michael, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eric. And a big thanks to everyone in the audience as well. We know there are many shows and sessions to choose from, so we appreciate you making time for us and ours today. And just a quick shout out to Enterprise Connect as well. Always great hosts and another great event here. And we're very excited to be hosting this session today. Bringing telephony into Microsoft Teams is obviously a hot topic at the moment, with many, many companies looking to unify their on-prem and often quite disparate PBX systems and bring those into Teams. And we're going to lean on our experience from the front line and go through 5 steps to making that migration a success, as Eric mentioned. And just before we dive in, a quick introduction to myself and Jason. So me first, I'm Michael Boggia. I'm the head of our US sales team. I'm based in New York and have been with LoopUp for almost 10 years now. And I've helped oversee some of our largest deployments during that time. Jason, over to you.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate everybody for joining. Yeah, I was Senior Director here at LoopUp. I've been in this Microsoft voice space for now 11 years consulting, and before consulting, worked with LCS as well. So I've seen the iterations all the way through, OCS, voice, link, Skype Online, and Teams, and have stayed true to it. And of course, over those years, I've learned to fine-tune what it takes to get onto the platform. And that's what we're hoping to kind of present to you guys today. So thanks, Michael. Back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. And just before jumping into the steps, I think a high-level introduction to who we are and what we're doing at LoopUp. So we are a UK public company. We have 15 offices worldwide, and we really have a wealth of experience in this space. We've always focused on premium external communication and collaboration, and have been a Microsoft Voice partner since 2010. We're a certified Microsoft Gold partner, a member of the TAP program as well. And we've really seen how this space has progressed and evolved since way back in the days of OCS, for those of you that remember those days, right the way through LCS, Link, Skype Online, and now Teams. And we're really seeing a real drive towards truly unified communications and bringing telephony into Teams. But it's often easier said than done. So, we're going to be talking through how you can make a migration like that successful, and some of the things to just keep an eye out for and make sure you cover when progressing through that project. So, Jason, do you want to cover the agenda?
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Michael. So today we're gonna start kind of at the 30,000 foot and then dig in a little deeper as we go through. So we're going to talk about what's your story learning, where you are in your journey, what's it take to start the conversation to move to Teams Voice. Talk about some of the rollout challenges from the field, what we've seen over the course of the last 10 years, and then the actual 5 steps it takes to make that successful. And then we'll summarize at the end with the key takeaways. Really, it's just the four main things that it takes to make that successful. So we'll deep dive into those here as we go forward. So the first thing to start with is we want to understand, because another word is envisioning, right? What's your story? Where are you? We want to get an understanding of your level of experience and knowledge of the Microsoft Teams platform, right? So to make a success, we want to first start with executive sponsorship. Do you have that buy-in, right? There could be strategies linked around all the way up to the tenant, Office 365 tenant. So there's a lot of different platforms inside Office 365. There's Exchange, there's SharePoint, there's all those things, right? So when we start talking Teams Voice, it affects those platforms. So we really need top-level executive sponsorship to buy into voice, because we're going to make changes in the tenant, right? The next thing is understanding your voice familiarity with Microsoft. If it goes back to Lync and Skype, it helps with your story. The move to Teams is a lot easier. The transition's smoother, because your end users are already familiar with that soft client approach, right? So that could help understand the journey as we kick it off. The Teams familiarity itself is important. If you don't have Teams in your environment at all, it could slow your process and add more planning to the front, right? So we don't want to go in acting like Teams is what everybody understands, right? So again, it starts to paint that picture. And then the legacy PBX, the old phone system, if you're on that and you have no Teams at all, then it could also slow it down even further. So we have to understand that story up front, so we plan everything it takes to make sure it's smooth. Early on, then, we wanted to define those business objectives and the goals. That's where the executive sponsorship is important. We need to understand why you're going to where you're going. Is it things such as, how your main numbers route? Maybe they're routing a certain way on your old PBX, and it needs to change tomorrow with how Teams does it. But we have to set those expectations early, because this could be an objective where you have licensing implications. You're going toward Teams because of Microsoft licensing, and so we have to change how things are done. So we want to document those up front, and then build out a plan to make sure we have success based on those goals. So I know I moved probably fairly quickly through these slides. So if you have questions on these bullet points, feel free to put them over in the questions, and we'll come back and answer them at the end. So some of the rollout challenges from the field, getting your team up to speed with administrating Teams Voice, and it's going to change, right? Your traditional PBX as a box that you configure and administer. So now we need to get into more familiarity with doing out of a GUI approach inside the cloud, right? So we have to make sure that your team understands what they're doing moving forward, away from the old way they're doing it yesterday. If you don't have any Microsoft Voice experience, we have to, again, it's in addition to that telephony administrator understanding to change everything how they do. Understand their jobs aren't going away. We hear that in the industry as Teams Voice kind of gets pushed back, because it's like, well, I've been doing a buyer for so long, I don't want my job to go away. There's plenty of work to do in the Microsoft Voice space. It just because it's in the cloud doesn't mean it's going to go away. In terms of easy, we hear that a lot. It's Microsoft Teams is easy. That's a misnomer in my opinion. Sometimes if we go about that approach, we overlook some of the important steps to getting it rolled out. And quite frankly, it can rub people the wrong way as well. Organizations have a lot of stuff going on in their environment. Teams isn't easy for them. They need help, right? So you have to understand from your own standpoint, what do I need to do to get up to speed on Teams Voice? If you're going to do it in-house or have help, just take your time to learn it and don't look at it like it's easy. And going back to the earlier slides, defining expectations. Again, day-to-day is going to change for people if they're coming off old traditional PBXs. So we have to document that and set clear expectations that your day-to-day is going to change. You had a headset or a handset yesterday, you have a headset tomorrow. Your 4-digit dialing you had may go away with name dialing. So we need to set those clear expectations with the business as well, that all that's going to change. As we go along the way, end user feedback is very important. We don't want to forget about your end users. If we're just pushing change down their throat, they may not like that. So we need to listen to it. And then overall, it comes back to just planning. How do we make sure that we plan the success from beginning to end, and that's where the 5 steps come in that we're going to move to next. So here's the 5 steps at a high level. We'll get to these deeper as we move forward. So really it's a readiness assessment, typical design and planning, configure the environment, user migrations, and user check-ins. Right, so if we do all these I can't even talk. If we do those slow and controlled in each one, we will have success at the end. If we burn through any at the beginning, the user migrations and check-ins will suffer. So spend a lot of your time on the front end. So the readiness assessment, this really has to do with the network. So traditional PBX systems, we have everything connects on your MPLS, your LAN, your WAN, so it stays internal to your network. You have quite good control over that in traditional ways. So now with Office 365, you have to connect to the cloud, which means the internet now becomes very important. So we like to think about getting into Office 365, which is getting into Azure as quick as possible for your traffic, your phone system traffic. So how do we do that? We talk about internet routing, which is very key. We like to think about local internet connections. We want to make sure that SSL decrypt is off. We don't want WAN optimizers, anything really in that network obstacle bullet point that get in the way of your traffic. We want to make sure that we talk about that, document it, and have a clear path forward and how you're going to address those, right? So let's say that you have all your WAN traffic that's getting inspected. We need to make sure Teams traffic is taken out of that. Otherwise, it can create a bad end user experience with choppiness and whatnot. So something we have to keep an eye on. Quality of service, QoS, that's important because how you do QoS with the phone system you have today may be different with Teams tomorrow, and it could require a change on how your switches are configured. Right, so we lay that plan out. Again, if we're working as a partner or if you're doing it yourself, you still need to follow the best practices with Microsoft. Make note of all the bullet points you have here, which there's more on the website, which we can give to you after this is over, of all the best practices. Make sure that you are meeting those needs. Another one to hit here on is the Teams certified devices. If you're rolling out, Teams, and say you have all your internet connections and it's all good, clear path to the internet, but you're having choppy call quality. It could be because you're using a third-party headset that's not certified, so it creates an end-user experience that suffers, right? So an example would be iPhone headphones are not certified, or you're not getting that true HD quality. It might get some staticness depending on what you're plugged into. It's very important that we document that and have a plan for Teams certified devices so it doesn't look like network problems moving forward. So step 2 here, design and planning, pretty traditional use phrase here, design and planning, but this is where you really want to start planning for success across the globe. Let's say you have 50 sites across the globe. In the design and planning stage, you really want to knock out the core items within Teams that need to be configured. You want to take all your time with your dynamic E911 in the US because you want to make sure you are holding to the laws that are coming. So Teams does do everything it needs to do to be certified in that space, right? So you can plan all that up front. All your dial plans and voice routing can be configured up front based on all your locations. The network topology is a section in Teams that you configure all your sites, subnets, trusted IPs, which is internet IPs. We want to make sure all that's documented and plugged in. Because Teams is an internet-based solution, there's more and more features such as dynamic E911 and location-based routing that are based on sites, subnets, and trusted IPs. If that's not in there, it starts to break down. So really spend most of your time learning about the network topology and making sure that is correctly mapped to your network wire map so you have the best results moving forward. Once you have all the technical requirements documented based on all the planning docs within the TechNet website, this is where you want to start your user and site migration rollout. So you can get an idea on with your 50 sites that maybe you want to do the US first, then you want to do the UK second. Start having those conversations so you can understand the impact that you're going to have on your end user base. And we'll get into the next slide on specifics around that. But if you do it early and often, then you can have that smooth transition and you don't have to go back and struggle as you start moving out your sites. So once we have the design and planning documented, we move into the configuration of this. This sets the tone for your success when you start migrating sites. So we've talked about planning, we've documented everything, we put it in spreadsheets if you're using scripts, whatever documentation or configuration route you want to take, make sure you're following whatever you develop. We start putting it in to the Teams tenant, and it can be staged and tested. I've seen a lot of migrations through my years since Skype Online came on and we started moving to the cloud, where everything can be completely staged and tested. You don't have to start moving phone numbers in the environment or turn on phone numbers. It can all be staged and tested. Success is rolled out with like main number routing being an example, E911 example. All that stuff 100% can be tested to make sure when you put users on it live, especially if you're porting numbers into Teams, you want to make sure you don't have to port back out, because it could be anywhere from 3 days to 3 weeks before porting happens. So recommend configure everything based on what you planned, test it, maybe get a pilot site to come in, maybe 4 or 5 users, give them fake numbers, whatever, test the functionality, and then start porting the phone numbers in. So we have to make sure that that's all laid out and that the groundwork's done. Plan for the end users and what they need. So we did the core configuration, subnets, all that kind of stuff is completed, right, because of our planning. But now we need to start talking about end users. So maybe the boss admin scenario, shared line appearance is often called. Right? How is that going to happen? You might have some people, executive assistants, who've been doing the same job and for 20 years using a traditional handset. We need to really treat them with a lot of respect because they may have a stressful job. They need to be white gloved. Here's how it's changing tomorrow. Here's how it's going to be done. Get them comfortable, because you don't want the executive assistant of a CEO having a bad experience. It can stop everything. So treat them with great respect to make sure they're comfortable, right, with the changes. And that kind of goes into the training conversation. Want to make sure that everybody's trained up as much as possible. Try not to do a push scenario where you just say, everybody's getting Teams. Too bad, learn it. Try to go to your end users and speak to them and make sure that they are 100% comfortable with what we're about to do. There's other end user functionality like call park, right? We want to make sure that's staged and configured. Group call pickups, stuff like that. We want to make sure that if they have a certain hunt group and how they're doing things, it's got to be configured and tested and make sure if it changes how they do their call pickups, they understand the changes that are coming. Right, so that plan can be staged here as well as you start moving into the migrations. Okay, so here we are with the site and user migrations. So we talked about the plan early on with those 50 sites, right? We have everything configured, it's staged, it's tested. So how do we start migrating? This is such a key to success here, right? So perfect scenario would be like, let's just cut everybody in one shot. We know that's the exception, not the norm. It needs to be kind of a rolling migration, but the recommendation here is don't set in a coexistence mode for very long. Right? Let's take an example here with bullet point number 2. Migrate all users tied to a main number. That's the best recommendation that we kind of start with. Example would be, let's say you have an environment in Dallas, right? A site in Dallas, and you're moving to Teams and they're on Cisco. We don't want to start chopping up that site if everybody's discoverable off of a main number. So we don't want to have to deal with what system owns that main number and then trying to route to user A who's in Cisco and user B who's in Teams. That's a bad experience and very hard to maintain from a management standpoint, right? And then the users can feel that pain as well if they're trying to call back and forth to each other and say you don't have an SBC in there to allow that on-net calling. You need to make sure that that is seamless. So we'd recommend taking a site that's tied to a main number and cutting that whole site in one shot. That'd be the very best and most common approach from my experience. Right? If that's not possible, then we just take sites and cut sites, right? Like all of Dallas goes, right? And if we have some weirdness, we'll talk through that and understand the risks and implications. So these 3 here are just 3 examples. In the planning stages early on, this has to be talked about to understand your culture and how you would like to see migrations happen in your environment, because every company is different. If you start talking through them, you can understand the risks that may come with how you want to do it. And if you have a partner involved, they can help you based on their experience on what you might see as issues based on your plan, right? So it's a very important conversation to have upfront, early and often, so you can start communicating to end users how it's going to affect them so they're not caught off guard. And then the user check-in. So this is kind of off of that migration strategy. When you start rolling out, we have technical success early on, right? It's going great. We have everything staged. It's all tested. You know, E911's working. The main numbers are routing great. And we're like, yes, success. Technical stuff is done. But then again, we forget about the end users. So we start cutting them over, thinking because we're technically ready, they're ready. That's just not great, right? So recommend pilots early on, or if you're just going straight to production with no pilots, stop after a few sites, maybe a site or two, and start talking to the end users to find out what pains they had, if any, and address those concerns and put it into your rollout procedure moving forward. Don't want to get 10, 15 sites in and the support tickets are coming in hot and heavy, your team's overwhelmed, and it's just because you didn't do your job to ask early on what those problems are, right? You, again, back to the boss admin scenario, right? Maybe moving off a headset to a handset or vice versa. It's creating problems in somebody's job and their stress is through the roof. They don't want to come to work, and all that stuff can be mitigated up front if you just listen to your end users and ask for that feedback, right? It might result in some additional training, you know, maybe have a SharePoint site on your website to help go through videos to show you how to do things. But it's very important to make sure that you're addressing those early and often so you don't, we call it poison the well, when your end users push back on the new system. All right, so user check-ins, keep that. And once that's all done, you can accelerate your rollouts. Once you finally find that pattern of success, you can move from, you know, slow rollout up front to really aggressive on the back end. I've seen organizations move 20,000 users in 3 months. Right? It starts slow, but then it's every couple of weeks. Maybe you start migrating 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 users if you're in a big organization and can move really, really quick. So it's all important to make sure that you're having great feedback. So on all that, the key takeaways for me to you, if you're doing internal or a partner, if you're doing an internal, you still want to do these. If you're having a partner come in, you want to challenge them to make sure that they're following these key takeaways. So envision your story up front. Right? Make sure that you have a voice in where you are, how important it is to you that it's very successful from point A to point B. Gather those requirements up front, spend a lot of time on it. That's the very important piece. All the technical requirements, all the end user requirements, and all your migration requirements are documented. Think through the process, everything you've talked about, all your requirements. Is it going to be successful to do it the way we're thinking about it? Test it with the pilot. Make sure it's solid, and then start to execute. Again, back to moving quickly. If you have to move quick, it comes down to having that plan up front early and often, talk about it, and then you can accelerate it. Right, so that's the key takeaways, and I believe that is my story. I will toss it back to you, Eric or Michael.
Okay, well, thanks very much. And we do have a few minutes for questions, and I want to start, Jason. That was a great presentation. Love, just the specific point-by-point, step-by-step thing.
Yeah.
I wonder if, and maybe this isn't something you've seen or you're beginning to see or expecting to see, but you kind of have this situation where maybe an enterprise had what would have been sort of in the old days and a normal staged plan for how they were going to migrate from the legacy telephony into whether it was Teams or whatever. And they had the offices they had, and maybe they had a few remote workers. Now the enterprise itself may be still up in the air about how many people are going to be back in the office versus working remotely. Maybe they're, if you're lucky, they do have that plan, but it looks very different from how it looked before the pandemic. How did they start to think about making this migration?
Well, we approach it the same way, right? It's you still want to talk about everything as if they're in the office, right? So I go back to that because the E911 is so important to me based in the US. So the conversations start there as well, but then those conversations about network become even more important because people are at home. So like split tunnel VPN is very important, and the headset conversation is very important. We don't want somebody to sit home that finds a $5 Walmart headset and they put it on and it's just awful, right? So the same approach applies to whether or not you're remote or in the office. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think, to your point, that's something we hear about a lot. It's just kind of all the ad hoc way people got themselves set up at home. We have got a couple of great questions in, so I want to keep moving. We have a question about maybe, I'm sure we could do a couple hours on this, but if there's a couple bullet points, if you worked with or looked at migration specifically where companies were going from a Cisco environment to Teams telephony, are there any specific particular issues or challenges or best practices or thoughts for that?
Yeah, so it goes back to that envisioning story early on, right? And so some organizations they think they want that integration between Cisco and Teams. And sometimes those can be blockers or inhibitors to moving forward with Teams, where if you're stuck on Cisco in there and you're allowing that integration back and forth for just what's called on-net dialing, it can slow that migration and make things difficult from a management standpoint. Again, it's end-user confusion you want to avoid. So we recommend avoiding that and doing a port or a cut out from Cisco as quick as possible, or any PBX for that matter. And it sounds like it's meant to get rid of Cisco. That's not the case. Any PBX on the other side. Don't stick in a coexistence mode if you can avoid it. Try to have that solid plan up front where you can move more aggressively.
Okay, yeah, I think your point, that's one of my immediate takeaways, or most things that I'm remembering from your talk, is just, kind of bite the bullet, or, get it done as quick as you can. We have another question, and this is a big issue with Teams, or a big thing that people talk about, is the third-party contact center integration. Does 365 and Teams, can you just integrate that telephony with, if you're using a cloud contact center service? How do you think about all you've talked about in conjunction with your contact center?
Yeah, so I'll keep this one 30,000 feet. So there are certified partners with Microsoft in the contact center world, and it's moving faster. More people are coming certified, more vendors. So there's certain integrations depending on the partner. So I can't answer that very deep, but like Anywhere 365 as an example, they have a certified platform, right, that integrates with direct routing. I saw a question come up with that as well. And so and there's also the communication service that's coming out from Microsoft, which should allow more integrations and more contact center builds, right, that will get better with time. But to answer your question in short, yes, there are integrations with third-party providers that can solve that need today that are actually very rich in their feature set. So if you have that need, we can send you some referrals after this, or you can go research it on the website and find out exactly who you need to fit your environment.
And I think we got time for one more question, and it's a question kind of specifically, and again, we've done half hour on E911, but basically, if someone is working from home, there are Teams, there are other systems that can associate that person to the correct PSAP, or public service answering point, basically, is correct.
Yeah, so E911 and Teams, it's really to meet Kerry's Law and Raybaum's Act. It's all about in the office for the most part, right? So you have subnets, wireless access points, all that stuff can be configured to find your location, right? Remote workers is still a remote worker, so you could move anywhere, right? And so today you'll be screened, right? So we recommend if you're sitting at home or whatever, probably want to use your cell phone to call 911 at that point. But as Teams progresses for remote workers, There will be more features come online that should help those locations. But today, to meet those laws, it's more internal to your office than it is external to your office.
Okay, got it. All right, and with that, we're just about at the bottom of the hour. We have some more great questions in here, but I want to let everybody know if you put a question in and we didn't get to it, we'll have that recorded here on the back end associated with your contact information that you gave us when you registered, and the team at LoopUp will be happy to reach out to you individually and answer your question for you. So this has been a terrific session. It's really interesting, useful, specific stuff, and that's always what we love to see. So thanks very much, Jason and Michael, and thanks everybody who attended also. Thanks to LoopUp for sponsoring the session. Within about the next 24 hours, everybody in the audience is going to get a personalized follow-up email, and that'll give you a link to a replay for this presentation if you didn't catch the whole thing, or if you want to forward that to somebody else who would also appreciate seeing it and maybe didn't get a chance to sign up. The webinar is copyright by Informa. Presentation materials are owned by, copyrighted by Enterprise Connect and LoopUp, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. Remember, our final session today is coming up at 3 o'clock Eastern, noon Pacific. It's called Enabling Voice in Teams Through Operators, and that's going to be hosted and feature speakers from Microsoft, so definitely a great way to end the day. On behalf of Jason Sloan and Michael Boggia from LoopUp in this session, I'm Eric Kraft. Thanks for your time and have a great day.